Okay. Now it's on here. Okay. Fine. You wanted five sentences, right? Summarizing the system.
Yeah.
But let's explain so far what we talked yesterday. Then we'll write, of course. We talked about a system where we can identify the reputation system having two things multiplied by each other. One is the user rating multiplied by the system rating. User rating, we say we don't trust each other on ratings only, so we bring the system behaviors as well. So we in the document we mention some criteria that we consider for the system rating. For example, whether the user have a good profile and then have skills onto it and then have done at least one work for a best reputed person, one thing, and then number of
There's a document, right? Can you link that to me in the Slack?
the document that we it's pinned in the Slack several
It's
times.
pinned? Okay, let's do it.
And Ryan, do you have the link for that document that we typed yesterday?
Is it the introduction?
Yes, should be that.
Yeah. It should be on Slack now.
It starts with the problem? Is that the one?
Yes,
yeah, I think that's one.
That's the one. So our pitch is like we don't go only with the user rating because user ratings cause many problems because it's only depending on the human behaviors. So we try to take some system behaviors so that nobody can lie there. Nobody can.
Where's that?
The system rating is.
I just want you to be super specific about what system rating means. That can mean many very different things.
Yes, we list down some criteria. What are the system rating that we are trying to get into this system? For example, so far we thought of having 10 criteria so that each having 1 point. If they have a profile picture, check 1. Then provider skills, check 2. Then it has a scale of 10 out of 10. What is the value that they are going to have?
So is this the thing about you get a 3 if you're a newbie, and then there's some sort of profile strength, and then all that kind of stuff?
That's right.
Okay. Gosh, I'm not sure I buy this, to be honest. It seems very opaque and hard for a user to understand. I think that the fundamental of a reputation system needs to be that it's simple and clear and predictable. If it becomes opaque and there's a lot of system magic going on, then it really leads to a breakdown in trust, I fear. I mean, I'm open to the argument, but my default position is that that's
why do a user need to know specifically what are the criteria that increase the reputation for them to try to be reputed, is it?
Imagine you worked for a company where they randomly fire people but don't tell you why and don't give you any feedback along the way that's interpretable about what you were doing good or poorly, and you say it's system feedback. I fear that this would cause everyone to distrust your manager or the company. No one would want to work there, right? Like
we publish our system rating scale. It's just the 10 criteria. I mean, I'm not hard-coded, but I'm trying to argue here because
sure.
Why do we have to take only the user's feedback. I mean, we can trust at certain time of the behaviors that we do in the system. For example, now when we say clear criteria, like, look here, you have to have a good profile picture that will give you 1 rating, and just mention your skills that will give you another 1, so that they can fill up their gaps. And also, in your profile page, you have something, for example, if I'm showing my skills as a web developer, have a sample web page in your profile, as a portfolio in your system where others can see. So that having a portfolio, at least one example, will give you 1 rating, so that people will be encouraged to show what they have done.
I mean, this seems complicated for the sake of being complicated, which just means that it's going to cause people to struggle to understand it. Like, it's not a very simple user model. Like, why should it be that by adding a photo to my profile, I add as much reputation to my profile as having worked 1,000 hours, for example, and gotten high ratings? That seems like a very weird situation. This is what I mean by saying something that's simple. It's like, first of all, I think most important ideas that come out of research are straightforward and simple, and 2, they're something that you can reason about. And here, what I worry is that I'm not against the system having elements of reputation, but they become gameable in another, and often very, very concerning way. Look at Mechanical Turk's reputation system, where it's all system ratings based on the percentage of work that gets accepted versus rejected. And so people react by hacking the system to get more of their work accepted by doing really, really cheap tasks. So there are these penny hit requesters who end up getting all the money, all the work done, because they accept everything. They take shoddy work. And so, like, what we would end up with in this case would be a bunch of people who upload profile photos that aren't of them, or random pictures of the internet, because it's how they get around the system and gain reputation, rather than them doing actually good work. You see, like, this, I feel like this goes against this notion of having an incentive alignment. It's going towards something where people are going to try to game the system. The more complex you make the system, like the United States tax code, the more and more people try to game it. So I'm not against making something complicated, but you have to start with something super, super complex, and then follow in a user-centered fashion tweaks to make it more more adapted to people. I worry that if you start with something complex, it's never going to get simple again.
Mm-hmm. So having only the user feedback, we have to that really constrain to think that we should take only the user feedback. I really can't think.
I don't think that. So let's talk about what the reputation system is doing. There's reputation, and then there's, I guess, in some sense, rating. So I don't think anyone is arguing that we don't want the signals that you have. Imagine that you're putting out a macro task, for example, and you have 3 people who do your prototype task, and you're trying to decide who you're going to go with. All of these things, like having a portfolio, sample work, a profile, a picture, these are going to greatly increase your... Oh, no.
We lost you. Ryan, can you hear Michael?
Hi, sorry. My Safari crashed.
Whoa.
What I was trying to say was that the... oh, there are apparently 2 of me now. I wish. We should be careful to separate out here what a... I guess in some sense there are the ratings, and then there's the broader scope of someone's reputation. If I put out a macro task where I want to hire someone to, I don't know, to clean up my resume, for example, and I get 3 people to do my little prototype task, the milestone 0, and I look at, and then I'm choosing who to go with, right? I'm going to make a lot of decisions based on the strength of their profile and all of these things that you've written there, right?
Yes.
There's no way that Like that is incentive aligned, right? That if I have skills, a portfolio, sample work, and so on, I'm going to be more likely to get hired. In fact, on Odesk, a guy was ran an experiment and found that he was more likely to get hired when he had a beard because he looked older. So I think with those kinds of things, we want to leave them as social factors, not as like mathematical ones. Because once they're mathematical, then you get gamed. Like social things should be fought out in some sense in the domain of the social.
Okay.
You see where why I'm pushing back on that?
Yes, it's just the behaviors that we are thinking, right? After having the okay.
I mean, so here's the feedback that I received having talked to a bunch of requesters and workers, and this is why I was iterating that I mentioned in the channel. One was that I got some pretty consistent feedback that 5 stars is too complicated, and so we need to simplify. So my inclination right now is to do something in terms of the feedback that's much more like a check minus, check plus kind of thing. So like, I want more of this person. So like, think of yourself as a requester for a moment. What requesters want to do and often do is create sort of private pools of workers who they know they really like, and then they reach out to those people over and over again. And I think we want to, like, when you think about that, that's a sort of reputation mechanism that is probably worth empowering at some level. And so if you're putting someone in your love it pool, you want to be able to make sure that they can do the tasks. They're the demons you know, as opposed to the demons you don't. So I'm considering that you want at least one bit that basically just says, I want these people to be in my pool of people who I trust. And then on the other hand, you have the people who are sort of, I don't want to work with them again unless other folks aren't available. So one thing I've really been thinking about is that I want to try and simplify. I guess one reason why I'm bearing down so hard on this is that I feel like I'm trying to simplify as much as possible.
Maybe
even what I'm suggesting ternary. So
okay.
After we select somebody, right? I mean, first of all, we have to select somebody. How would you solve that problem? I mean, that you propose the number 3 rating as for newbies, right? Is that one you propose?
Oh, so most people would default to neutral, right? So instead of 1 to 5, imagine that you now have, let's just call it 0 plus 1 and minus 1 or something like that. So or check minus, check plus. And all newbies, we don't want to start newbies out in a check minus zone, because then they only get bad work, and that's a really bad deal for new workers, right? Like, that means that a new worker's experience is going to be that they only see bad work that doesn't pay very much, and we're never going to get them into the platform. So I honestly am inclined to put new workers, basically somewhere in the middle, such that they have the opportunity to show off their stuff, and assuming they're good, we can quickly make sure they're accelerating and getting better and better work. So I guess what I was originally suggesting was something on the order of 1 to 5 stars. I'm now suggesting is something that's more like 1 to 3 or something like that. It's just compressing the scale because I think it makes the mental calculus easier, and that it gets people. I think people are going to be more likely to rate, especially with microtasks. Keep in mind, if we're starting with microtasks, a microtask requester might have 2,000 workers who they hired for a single job, right? They're not going to be looking at people's profiles. They might, but probably not initially. Oh my gosh, Angela, such a beautiful son.
First 5, they would see the profiles of first 5 they get as a result, right? That's what normal people do.
Yeah. So if they're doing a prototype test, yes. But eventually, when they launch their task, they're going to have 2,000 people who did their task, right? If they opened it up to everyone.
Can I ask a question there as well? If we start people off with, say, 3 out of 5 to start with, could we weight it so then that first rating they get would be weighted higher than a normal rating. So at least, say for example, someone 3 out of 5 and then does a great job, that would be weighted quite strongly. So then that would move them up to
Yeah.
So just taking the average of like the number of tasks they do, then that would do it.
Yeah. So what I proposed, I still am roughly in favor of. I'm sorry if this is going to get a little bit technical for a minute. It's roughly the equivalent of having a Bayesian prior on someone, and the question is, how strong is your prior? I'll explain this now in slightly less mathy terms. Basically, pretend, we'd have to decide the number, but basically pretend every new worker has done, say 3 or 4 tasks and has gotten rated at that 3 level. So the thing they do is going to nudge them. Let's say they get a 5. I'm going to stick with 1 to 5 just for the moment for the illustrative purposes. Then it's going to nudge them up as if you were averaging, now say 4 tasks and it was 3, 3, 3, 5. And then they do another task and they get another 5. Now it's 3, then it's 3, 3, 3, 5, 5, and it's going to move up quickly. So very quickly, those initial pretend ghost ratings will get squashed. And we can choose how many we want to sort of silently initialize everyone with, based on how much you want their rating to swing quickly. So for example, if we chose to do just 1, if I did 1, if my first task was one that I did poorly, all of a sudden I'm in the pits and I'm only getting bad work. So my inclination is to have a little bit of buffer there, though not a ton. So the trade-off is basically against, we want to have enough time for people to figure out what's going on and make some teenager mistakes, versus making sure not flooding requesters with bad workers, basically.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
And that was a good illustration. Thanks.
So basically, Adam and I worked through a lot of our. So part of has gotten me thinking again is that Adam and I talked to Durham, and who was it? Shoot, hold on, let me identify. Someone had pointed out a really important error in what I was suggesting. Elsa had pointed out an error. So if you remember, I had suggested sort of doing this multiplicative factor of worker versus times requester rating. I now think that breaks a bunch of mental models in a bad way. So for example, imagine I were a worker and I gave a requester a 1. I hated them. But the requester gave me a 5 because I'm a really good worker. And then imagine another scenario. Well, so now, for example, imagine another scenario where I gave a requester a 2. I thought they were like a little iffy, but not horrible. And then they also gave me a 2. What's going to happen if you do this multiplicative factor is that the person who I gave a 1 is going to appear above that other one in my feed. And as a worker, that feels to me really weird, right? Like I said, I never want to see you again. And all of a sudden you're appearing above someone else who I liked better. Like, my initial reaction was like, oh, yeah, that seems odd. So I did some ad hoc brainstorming yesterday. I just grabbed Adam, who's down the hall from me, and also got some critiques from others in the group. I want to call out Neil and Durham also really helped me think through some of the math here and many of the ideas in the model. So the 4 of us really were talking a lot yesterday. And here's sort of where our thinking landed for a moment. One is, so let me state everything that you've said about the other system signals I'm very much fine with in terms of especially the profile, because I expect that, yes, with macro tasks and many other things, we want to have them there. I don't think we want them immediately in the formula for the reason that I mentioned about how gameable they are. But I'm open to an argument on that. Let me just set that aside. For a moment, let's assume, I want to lay out some different assumptions than I had initially. One is that I feel like the worker's feed should be really about the worker. So that if a worker says, I never want to see this person again, or I really love this person, the feed should respect that. That's what I mean about having something that's interpretable. It's
Yeah, I
like
agree.
I,
Yeah, definitely.
I understand the model, right? Um, and if I don't understand the model, then I don't trust the system, and then we failed our initial goal. So I want to whatever extent possible to respect the worker's preferences in terms of the ranking of my feed. And now, due to that, if that means that if I say I love this requester, I gave them a check plus, then they'll pop up to the top of my feed. If I gave someone a check minus or I ban them, I'll never see them again, or they'll just be down at the bottom. Only when I'm truly desperate. I'm like, so I want to start there. Yeah.
Is it possible to have a setting where a worker could say just anyone who I write below 2 just don't show in my feed? Like, could we could give them that sort of option, couldn't we?
Yeah, we could certainly build filters into the sorting and searching in the feed. I think that would not be. I think that would be a very reasonable thing to do.
And to let them recheck it if they decide that there's not enough work out there and they want to just do whatever. Give them the power to kind of choose what they want in their feed and what they just want to cut out forever.
Well, I feel like I'm sorry if I came across as like too aggressive previously. I just want I'm in this case. I guess my point is just that if it's a feed, we'll rank it as we rank it. So the stuff that they said they liked will be at the top. So if they want to cut everything else out, they can. And the system may in fact want to automatically hide bad stuff, just so we don't make it look like we're full of bad stuff. This is sort of the broken windows hypothesis. I don't know if you've heard of that. Basically, a bunch of studies that look at if there are broken windows in the neighborhood around you, it basically encourages more crime because everyone can see that there's crime around, so it normalizes the crime. Whereas if you sort of very quickly paint over graffiti or fix the windows and so on, it produces this sort of collective notion that it's not what we do here. So anyway, that does suggest that we may want to hide the low-ranked requesters by default, unless you explicitly want to go digging in the trash.
Okay, now we argue that our ecosystem will emphasize all the one. Now, what if I was a bad worker at once, but I will be a good one next time? What possibilities that I get a chance into the system?
Yeah, I haven't talked at all about the worker side yet. About the requester side. I'm only mentioning how the workers rank their own feed and what their mental model should be. So I think what you just asked is a really important question, but is it okay if I hold off on that for a moment?
Okay.
Okay, so I'm just laying out sort of my assumptions here of who wants what, because the who wants what is critical to getting people to do what we want them to do. I think the workers want to find the best work they can. They want to be able to get at it directly, and as you say, they want some, they want to be able to, improve, recover, and I would say likewise, if they're falling off the horse, they should be told that they're falling off the horse. You can't have only a friendly system. There has to be a little bit of discipline if they're not doing a good job, and that's different than being draconian. It just means that there need to be consequences if you're not a good worker, right? And you continue to not be.
I think that's where the kind of skills-related stuff might come in future if we develop it, where people can kind of work on upskilling a certain area, whether it's like communication skills or specialist skills in tasks they're doing. But I mean, obviously not something we can do by September.
Well, maybe we'll surprise ourselves. I mean, I think the hardest thing about that will be actually, in some sense, a human problem where we will need to build up the community for each of those areas. So we'll pick one at a time and start to grow out. That's what I would recommend. You can't see me anyway, right? So I might as well turn off my camera to save battery.
No, I can see you.
Oh, you can? Okay.
And your striped shirt.
Yeah, that's all you can see, right? It's funny, I'm sitting right under a light, but whatever. Okay, so flipping over to the requester side. So requesters basically here's what I've seen. Requesters often want to build up a group of people who they trust. Like they're sort of the people they've seen and know are good. They like better than the people they haven't seen. And we have to balance that, of course, against making sure that new workers get opportunities. Requesters also hate bad work much more than they love good work. I know that sounds weird, but if you have, like, if I'm, how do I put this? If I've just asked for 100 people to label my images or something, let's say it's a micro task, and one person is just spamming or scamming me, that is enough to get someone to believe that the entire platform is horrible. It's a really risky position to be in. And likewise, they're incentivized to get good work done. I'm sorry, it's a little more complicated than that. They want good work done subject to their budget, right? It's sort of like I might be willing to make an explicit trade-off where I will take something that's cheaper in exchange for it being worse quality. Like, I don't have a budget for a $10,000 Photoshop job, so I'll take the $10 one that's really, but at least I made that decision. I want that to at least be explicit. Okay, so I want to come back to what I had initially suggested with this cascading release, because I had initially said this sort of multiplicative factor, but if we're now saying that the feed is entirely requester driven, then it seems to me that the only remaining lever we have is something like that sort of release set of gates. So what I'm sort of thinking is that we get, on one dimension, the worker's feed is completely ranked by their opinion of a requester and or the sort of average rating that requesters have gotten. So sort of like how much the system predicts I would like that requester. And then for the requester side, basically what happens is that the system starts releasing over time, starting with the really high-rated workers all the way down to everyone, in order of basically whether I have check plussed them in the past, like given them a high rating, down and down and down and down to the people who I said I would still use them, but only when I'm stuck. This basically creates an incentive for the workers to be as good as possible, because the better I am, the better work I get access to, the stuff that's higher paying, I get early access, all that kind of thing.
That works too, because if people do have kind of artificially inflated reputations for any reason, they still would be lower than the top, the better,
right.
better work. So
as long as everyone's relatively scaled, that you're right that would work. So even if everyone's 4.75, if the really good people are 4.8, still
then it will work.
So at some level, I guess what I'm proposing at a baseline is that requesters ratings are used to basically create these levels that the system of worker that the system releases tasks to. So basically, I guess here's what I'm getting at. If we do this, we are never lying to the worker. I really started to get uncomfortable with lying to the worker by ranking things through some multiplicative factor, and then they would just try to reverse engineer it. But if we do this, then it's just basically something where we tell the worker, this task is not available to you yet. It's only available to people who have higher ratings. Or it just doesn't appear in their feed yet because it hasn't been. So either we show it and we say it's like coming soon, or we just say, you know what, like we hide it from them until it gets released from them. And now it's like it's like simple and clear, and there's a simple model that people can understand. It's just, it's there or it's not, and if it's there, it's going to be ranked by how much I said I would want it. So I believe that if we would do this, then we have to ask the question of whether people would actually rank or rate, right? So I believe that many workers will rate. Not all the time. I have a student who's spent a ton of money on Mechanical Turk recently, and his Turkopticon ratings, he gets actually maybe like 1 or 2 a month. like relative to the number of people who are doing his tasks, it's insane how few ratings he gets. But there are far more workers than there are tasks, requesters with microtasks. So I think that even if you had, I'm trying to make these very conservative estimates to make sure that the thing still works. So even if you only had like 5% of workers rating a requester, which would be pretty low, but let's assume that for a moment, I think you would still get a signal. Imagine I'm a requester. I put out a job for 100 workers to help me, I don't know, fill in some business cards or something like this. Then I'm likely to get 5 ratings. That's actually pretty helpful to the rest of the workers, right? You average that, and that says something. It gives some signal to the rest of the workers about how we should be ranking you in their feed. Everyone loved you, if everyone hated you, etc.
That's interesting to hear that about microtasks, because from my experience and what I was thinking for the reputation system is it might be good to have the kind of the rate of ratings included in it, but that would be for microtasks specifically. Like, for example, like on Freelancer for the macro task, if a worker or requester didn't rate the other person, it would be completely, I think, from past experience, be because they didn't like it at all, wanted to give a low rating. But whereas microtasks, it sounds like it's completely different. It's not that people think it's a bad outcome, it's just that they can't be bothered, or it's just not the culture of the platform.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'm actually not, I'm very much not against releasing the percentage of people who rate you. That might be an interesting thing to put on the profile. I'm also not against releasing, I'm against releasing individual feedback, at least right now, because I think it encourages the nagging and the like, please make it higher kind of process. But I'm not, I wouldn't necessarily be against releasing whether the person gave you feedback, and then maybe batching the feedback and saying like, and only updating it, you know, after 5 tasks or something like that, so that you can't actually know which person you worked for gave you the really negative feedback.
That's a nice idea. I'll leave that alone.
Well, anyway, so I'm very much open to that kind of thing. Angela, I think what you're suggesting makes a lot of sense.
And one thing I wanted to know, it's like the macro and the micro task can have the same weightage, because it's anyway, the one is very complex and one is not so complex. So when it comes to check plus, check minus, so will that be fine if it's macro or micro?
I heard half of that. Do you think you can move closer to the mic?
Okay, actually I was asking if it's like a macro and a micro, should it have the same weightage? In the sense, like a macro can obviously it will be very complex. So when it comes to rating in terms of like check plus or check minus, so will it be fine the complex task is compared to a very normal task in terms of rating when we read the app?
So I'm going to ask something back to you, and then tell me if I understood your question correctly. I think you're asking, should there be a different mechanism for rating microtasks than macrotasks, or you're asking whether check plus, check minus would work well with macrotasks? Is that what you're asking?
No, yeah, the first thing what was like there should be I think there should be a different one.
So here's my hunch. I'm happy to be wrong, but I'll lay out my hunch. My hunch is that check minus, check plus actually captures a lot of the signal that we care about. Basically, what I feel like, it's not hard for people to make a snap judgment that says, that was about what I was expecting. Nice. Versus, that was worse than I was expecting, and I'm like kind of unhappy. Versus, wow, that hit the ball out of the park. I'm really happy with how that went. And I feel like that applies. Having acted as a requester both on micro and macro platforms for a while, I feel like that basically captures my opinion about especially macro tasks. I think it's actually much easier to do that with macro tasks than with micro tasks. With micro tasks, if I say, please, check this box if it's an X and check that box if it's a Y, and they do it, I'm sort of like, all right, that's roughly correct. And so there's a lot more checks in my mind. Whereas with a macro task, there's often much more room for creativity. And so it's much easier. I feel like I would get more checked pluses or checked minuses, to be honest. Like remember Angela in particular might remember this. I did these prototype tasks that were on Upwork trying to get logos for my group, and like one of them or two of them were really, really bad. Like those were clearly check minuses. Right? Like on Upwork, I could not give them lower than 4 stars or they would never get a job again. But it's a check minus, like in terms of how happy or unhappy I am.
Mm-hmm.
Did that answer your question at all? I'm not sure. I'm still not sure I understood it correctly.
No, because what I was thinking is both the macro tasks will be very complex to judge at the same level in terms of micro and macro.
Is the context the same? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
I think that, well, again, so I'm just laying out my hunch here, and again, I'm happy to be wrong. My hunch is they are often different tasks, but so too multiple macro tasks are very different. Getting someone to write a song for me is very different than getting them to build software for me or getting them to design a logo. So they are different, but I'm not sure that they're so different that it wouldn't be that it doesn't really apply. Like check minus, check plus is used in many, many different educational environments, professional environments. So
I actually, I think too, kind of with a traditional star rating system, 1 to 5, I think people are almost programmed in a way to go with 4 or 5 regardless. So I think that system really makes, gives people the tools to make an honest judgment. I like it.
Well, so as you pointed out, the 5-star rating system, if people used the 5-star ratings, sort of continuously, like effectively, then you would get more information out of it than check minus, check plus, right? Because it captures this gradation between, I really hate this, I'm sort of displeased, I'm pretty neutral, I kind of like it, and I love it, which we lose if we go down to 3. But empirically, all these systems that use 5-star ratings, as Angela was pointing out from like the various videos and so on, they tend to cluster. People tend to give 5 stars or 1 star, basically, which in my mind is probably check minus or check plus, and they tend to only do that because they rate salient experiences, ones that are especially good or bad.
But what would choose 5 stars, 4 stars, or 1 star? And that's effectively the three there. So
that's true. So I can't promise that it will solve the problem, but I think it might spread things out more. Now I can totally see some requesters or some workers giving being sort of like having candy and like giving everyone a check plus, or just giving everyone a check.
I wonder, can I ask here? I did I think it was Harvard's The Science of Happiness course on edX, and we did one of their systems that we used, or one of the quizzes was a big smiley, super big smiley happy face in green, I think, kind of a smiley happy face in yellow, and then a frown in red, and it was so easy for just making a quick decision which one. I mean, you do have that sense when you finish the task. What if you thought it was great or just all right or a little bit bad. So it might encourage more people to give ratings, and also I can see how it would give a more honest. Well, I mean, hopefully, would give a more honest sense of the quality of the task at the end of the day. But also, the other thing that I like about it is that it's not something that any other platform's doing at the moment. So it is innovative and potentially very useful.
Well, I think we have to be. I think from a product perspective, it will be different and hopefully fresh. I think from a research perspective, people have considered 3-point Likert scales before, so we can't just say our innovation is the 3-point. But luckily, I don't think we have to rest all of our research on that. But I think we can make a case that this is an important element. So I guess I want to come back to, I'm trying to break these concepts and see, if so, how we can adapt them. So just sort of wrapping back around to summarize, I guess what I'm putting out there based on all of your feedback, and I've tried to pull in all of these critiques, and like this is sort of where my head's at right now. So please continue with the critiques so that we can evolve it. Is that workers' ratings? So workers can rate requesters as check plus, check, check minus, something like that, or happy, medium, frowny. I'll use those. I'll use the three for now. And that is used to create some sort of aggregate score about the requester. And the incentive-compatible mechanism there is that if I give someone a check plus, it basically propels them up to the top of my feed. And if I give someone a check, it basically leaves them in the middle. And if I give someone a check minus, it guarantees that they're sort of down at the bottom, and I'll only get there when I pay attention, or maybe it even hides them. For requesters, if I rate workers highly, they get sort of in that first gate, the first ones out of the gate. They get early access to my tasks, followed by workers who other folks have rated quite highly, followed by workers who, in general have been okay, like checks, and then eventually down to the check minuses if there's still if my task is still has not been taken up, has not been accepted by someone. The one other thing that might break this is, especially if we're starting with microtasks, I've yet to see a microtask platform where the requesters rate every worker. Nor do I think it would be good to assume they would. So again, assume that I did a survey. Sorry?
I think you're cutting out there. Maybe everyone else can hear, but...
Yeah, I dropped him too. I couldn't hear him properly.
So I should rewind like 30 seconds?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess I'm trying to break the approach here, and the way to break it in some sense is, if requesters are not rating workers, then you're not going to have a very strong signal, right? And on microtask platforms, and we'll have, especially it seems like at the beginning, we're going to have a fair amount of microtasks. If we rely on every requester rating every worker, that seems like it's not going to happen. And I would argue it would be potentially a bad idea to force it. So, again, imagine that you're running a survey and you ask 1,000 people to do your survey. If we forced you to rate every single person, you would probably never come back because you'd spend hours rating people.
I've got a question, Michael. With microtasks, if you're happy with the state of it overall, could you give one rating that would be allocated to everyone, but also at the same time be able to pick, because you mentioned if there's one person who's kind of like a spammer or doesn't do the work, is it easy for you as a requester of microtasks to identify who that individual is, or do you have to go through them all to pick it out? So basically what I would say is, for microtasks, if you could give one kind of score that would be applied to everyone except for pick out the bad eggs and give them a low score, is that possible, or is that, how does that work?
We could do that if we want. I can describe to you what, say, Mechanical Turk does, and Mechanical Turk is no paragon of design here, but just as a baseline. Okay, so on Mechanical Turk, you get all of your data back in a big spreadsheet, basically, and you have to reply with accept or reject. Their signal is whether what percentage of work gets rejected. That's how they think you're good or not. So the default is probably accept. What most people will do is look through, make sure that it's above some, like, make sure that you're not doing blatantly bad work. And as long as you're not, they'll accept everyone. They won't pay a ton of attention. But if someone's clearly doing poor work, then they'll reject. This is reasonable in some ways, because if you just if you reject something that's borderline, the workers will often complain and say, "I tried really hard at this." And it's like, well, they were bad quality, but what do you do? And then they end up paying anyway. So go ahead, say what you're going to say.
Sorry, so your spreadsheet that you get is all of the workers' information all together in one spreadsheet, or you have one worker's work in one spreadsheet and the other worker's work in another? How does? Sorry,
It's usually interleaved. I wonder if I can find. Yeah, so think of it as a spreadsheet where each row, let's say it's sorted by task and then by worker. So you have a spreadsheet where it's like image 1, and then you have 10 people's different answers about what's in image 1. And then you have image 2, and you have 10 people's answers about image 2. And one thing to keep in mind is that with microtasks, especially when there are a bunch of them, those 10 people may be different for each one of them. However, we could, if we think it makes sense, we could decide to group by worker rather than by task. But yeah, so I guess to articulate the concern, a possible concern is, we want workers to build up their sets of, we want people to be check-plussing workers so that they are sending a signal to us, and the reason that we hope that will happen is that so that they can prefer those workers in future tasks. But it's not clear that even that would be enough for someone who's regularly interacting with 2,000 workers or something like that, or let's say even 100. I think 100 is reasonable, that like a normal person might ask for. So this was an idea that I think Durham or Adam Ginsberg suggested, and I find it interesting, so I wanted to see what you all think of this. It would be, we would try to create a norm. So when the work is getting done, certainly we ask you to rate the quality of anything that's in the prototype task. I think that's easy, and we'll hopefully get a bunch of feedback. But let's also think about, like, when you get your 100 results back, maybe what we do is on the way in, when we say your results are ready and you're like, sweet, and you click the button, we pop in and we say, hey, we've selected here, like, I don't know, 5, 10 workers who we'd really like to get your feedback on. If you like them, then they'll show up more often for your tasks in the future, etc. And here we've pulled out just their work. And we ask the requester to rate just those 5 or 10 people, and they can skip it if they want. I think the danger is whenever you force it, you're just encouraging people to do 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3 all the way down or whatever. But so we give them the opportunity and hope they do for a small percentage, and then when they get to the results, we sort of initialize those ratings into the rest, and then the completionist will be like, oh, I've already done some of them, maybe I'll complete. But I guess the hope would be that we even, like, let's say that you had 100 people and we got 5 ratings. 5 people got rated. So that's like 1 in 20, right?
Yeah.
If I'm a so I'm just trying to think through the back of the envelope here. Like, if I'm a microtask worker, I think it would be easy to assume that I might work for, say, 10 different requesters a day, doing a bunch of different tasks. 20 minutes here, half hour here, something like that. So if that's true, then over the course of 2 days, I will have worked for 20 requesters. And if I'm going with this sort of 5% rough estimate, then that means that every 2 days, I would get a piece of feedback from a requester. And that doesn't seem so bad, especially if we're, selecting the people to be rated such that they're newbies, like newcomers, so that because we know less about them, and then eventually as we get more confidence, then we're sampling less often just to make sure we keep track if someone's getting better or getting worse or whatever. So it's a sort of a soft nudge, but I'm wondering, I think the reason this system would fail is if we don't get enough feedback from requesters. And I'm thinking, okay, so what do we really need? And maybe with that little nudge, it would be enough to get, 1 in 20 workers rated. And that would be enough to get a good signal about most workers.
Right. But in a way, highlighting the fact that the requester is getting some control over identifying who might appear or who might be promoted in.
Yes. I
mean, you can see it as an incentive for a requester,
yes,
that they would engage because of that.
Yeah, my hope is that would do that's the majority of the effect. I just want to, I guess the root of the suggestion is that it can seem overwhelming if we're like now go rate all of these 100 people and decide who you want to see next time.
Absolutely. I think maybe even 3 would be a good number, because 5 still seems to me, okay, I'm thinking of MOOCs again. When we're asked as participants to rate and evaluate other peers' work, the peer assessment, me personally and some of the other people, when you get 3 people's work to rate, it's fine, you go through and do it. When there's 5 classmates' work to rate, you get disheartened. And if there's 7, there's been a couple where there's 7, the completion rate of those MOOCs is so low, and I think specifically because that you're being forced to rate so many. So I'd say even start with 3.
Yeah, I agree with the 3 too, because I remember one time the 7th thing, I rated all in the middle, because sometimes I don't even care whether they have done a better job or not. It just,
I need to learn. I don't need to do this assignment business. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think in the case of a macro task, and I would call like a MOOC a macro task, like a MOOC assignment, that took hours and hours to do, right? I think that I'm less worried that people won't be rating. Like with macro tasks, I actually expect that in something like 75% of cases, we can get people to leave a rating. But let me back up and say I actually agree with you. I think this is something we can do in a data-driven way. We can prototype and we can try what's it feel like with 3. My hunch is that with 3 you can do it in like 10 seconds. So 5 might not be such a big deal.
I think try it out. Whatever. I mean,
that's a really good idea. Try it. Like within the system we have. Let's have 3 criteria and then prototype it and see.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm reading Jay Silver. What's the note?
Can I make another suggestion? What would happen a lot in MOOCs as well for assignment grading is we were given 3 or 5, and then it always gave the option. It would say, once you're done those 5, would you be willing to do 1 more, or would you be willing to do 2 more? And when you have enough time, often people do that. They say, yeah, no problem, I'll do 2 more. I've got an hour, I can do 100 more. That's great.
Yeah.
That might be an option.
So I feel like somehow setting the norm of like, please do 3, and like giving a little like, how in in internet ads you can do the like little corner thing that's like no thanks or close it. Like I think we want to give that Steam release valve, but setting the norm that's like, just please take a look at quickly these ones and give them a considered rating.
And especially
and then hey,
it will overall quality of the workers on the platform.
Oh yeah. I think we do that. No, yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. So yeah, and I think beyond that, here's something I don't suggest we do immediately. But I was continuing to think about like how you can continue to, I guess, gain ability, skill, notoriety if you're a really good worker. And we had talked a bit about like having levels, like level 1 Photoshop, level 2 Photoshop. One thing we could eventually do is just sort of like open up, the star ratings. For example, like if everyone starts out as like 1, 2, or 3 stars, we could eventually sort of level you up, and now you're 4, 5, or 6, or something like this. I want to keep in mind how eventually we could allow people to grow in those kinds of ways. I think in part because eventually, like, if we really grow, scaling everyone between 1 and 3, even the average people are going to get really depressed. There's a there's a thing in software engineering known as a 10xer. That is to say, that there's a saying that like the best programmer at Microsoft is actually something like 100 times more productive than the worst programmer at Microsoft. And so you can imagine if that's the case, you're going to have your worst programmer at Microsoft, who's probably a really good programmer because they're at Microsoft, is actually going to like get a pretty depressing rating. So I feel like eventually, if we want to avoid workers and requesters from getting depressed about like not being able to move up, I think what we do is we make the top higher and higher. But that's, I think, for much later.
And
Anyway, this is just something I was thinking through.
actually, I was thinking something. I don't know whether I'm correct or not. So, can we include recommendations, kind of, something, so recommendations or certifications?
Yeah. So recommendations, you mean like if almost network based, like if my wife really liked this worker, like they go higher and like they get earlier access to my tasks or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. It can be like that. And suppose for newbies, it's like suppose a person was working in some company and then he planning to drop it and work as a full time. So he can get a recommendation from there that yeah, he's probably worked in the web designing or something like that. Or yeah, if
Yeah.
if a requester really likes a person, he can probably recommend.
Yeah, so I'm totally game for that. I think that feels to me like a feature in some sense that like, and what I mean by that is it would enhance the sort of foundation, and thus I would think about doing that after we understand the sort of basic, I guess how the users behave. But I'm totally game for doing you can imagine, for example, Asmita, you and I could like create a group, like we could sort of affiliate and like share our worker pools. That would be interesting, right? So to be able to say, we're all in a group, and anyone that, if you rate someone up, then because I trust you, like they're also going to be rated up for me or something like that. I think that kind of thing would be really interesting. And for macro tasks and on people's profiles, being able to put, this person worked for Angela, and I'm like, oh, I trust Angela's taste. I'm totally for all of that. It's probably not the first thing I would build, but that's not me saying that I don't like it. It's just saying that it has to build on to something else. So I would do that sort of second. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Then that comes as part of the system rating, right? One feature that we can think of.
Yeah, for example. Yeah, I guess I still chafe a little bit at calling it system rating. I would much rather sort of term that something around like the crowd CV or the portfolio or the resume or my profile. But yeah, I mean conceptually, I think I'm totally agreed.
Okay. In that case, it's better now if we can simulate the 3 rating check, minus plus 1, and see within ourselves how does it work. Let's try to make some queries and also some data where we can play around and see.
Sure. I'm wondering, maybe Angela and me, who else did the prototype test? I forget if Ryan Compton did. We could repost for ourselves those, like some recent tasks that we've put on crowdsourcing platforms, and then see how easy it would be for us to do that kind of a rating, and to see whether it feels comfortable. I expect with the macro tasks it certainly would, just because on the macro tasks I'm already doing a 5-star rating.
Yeah, I think it would be easy for macro tasks. I can see it being
but Dilrukshi, if you'd like to lead that charge of maybe like gathering some tasks, especially maybe we should do it from a micro task, since that seems to be at least our initial work from Microsoft is mainly sort of micro tasky. I think it would be really cool to try it out, ourselves in a Google Doc or a Google spreadsheet or something, just to see how we feel. Like, yeah, does it seem reasonable, or is it really onerous, or what? In the meantime, I guess my proposal is that I can try to put together sort of a wiki page V2 that that captures everything we've talked about, including your suggestions, and that maybe we try to refine that and move forward.
That would be best idea, because if we can have concrete ideas so that we can evolve, surrounding that one. Yeah,
Sure.
that's a good idea.
Also, Michael, you mentioned you had a meeting with Neil and Durham and Adam yesterday. Do you have a Hangout recording of that, or was it informal?
It was super informal. I called them from the box in my office that doesn't let me do Hangouts on air.
Yeah, fair. Just thought if there's something. Whoops! You flipped onto my dining table.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no. I think it was. Yeah, so that one unfortunately wasn't recorded, and it was partially because it was super ad hoc. I just sort of.
Just was wondering if there's any other ideas in there that people felt strongly about, or if we're capturing everything, or.
Let me.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just going to pull open. I took a picture of my whiteboard at the end just to see if there was anything I'm forgetting. A lot of the discussion was us walking through, like, imagine this scenario, like where the worker hates the requester and the requester loves the worker. What would have happened there? And we just sort of walked through a number of those options. Sorry, I need to grab power. Let me see. AD, can I borrow your power? Yay, power. Say thank you to my wife.
Thank you for sharing your husband with us.
You want to leave? Oh, wait.
Hi.
Sweet.
How's it going?
She's working on a big database of scales of in educational research, trying to understand how you measure various motivation, attainment. She's doing this huge survey of education research. It's pretty cool. Anyway.
That sounds really cool. That's right up my street. I love that sort of stuff.
Somewhere here, there's a plug. If I disappear, it's because I run out of power. Anyway, I think we're almost done, would be my sense. Okay, here's a plug over in the dark corner, of course.
At least you don't have spiders there that see
yeah,
reaching in the dark.
Yeah, I guess an Aussie, someone living in Australia, has more reasons to be afraid of the animals living in the dark than people living in Palo Alto.
To be fair, they usually run a mile, so, or at least half a meter when you're scuttling about.
Yeah. I guess Aussies are braver than we are anyway. We're like, oh my God, there's a spider! We're totally gonna. And you're like, that's not really going to hurt you at all. Anyway, so yeah, I can try to pull together the proposal. Oh yeah, I was gonna, before my thing ran out, I was gonna check my picture of my whiteboard to see if there was anything else.
I think Rejules just joined us. Welcome.
Yeah. Welcome. So I guess here's the exercise we went through, and I guess I would encourage you to do this too, to see whether the system behaves in the way that you would want it to. Like, think about, have two columns, be like worker and requester, and just be like, worker, does the worker love it or does the worker hate it? Or excuse me, is the worker really, really rate the requester highly, or does the worker really hate the requester? And does the requester really love the worker or hate them? And think through what happens. So if both sides love each other, then the requester's task is going to be released first to that worker, and it's going to show up first, at the top of that worker's feed, right? That's it, right?
Yeah.
Likewise, if they both hate each other, then that requester's task is going to release to that worker at the end, and for the worker, it's going to show up down at the bottom of their feed. And that also seems right. They're basically each other's last and just kind of try to walk through a bunch of these. So if they both sort of like each other medium, then the requester's task will go to other people first. But if those people aren't as interested, then it will show up to the worker who to this worker, and for that worker, it'll basically be below other stuff that they love, but above the stuff that they hate. And then think about these asymmetric ones, where like the worker gets a really low rating, but the requester gets a really high rating. So imagine that I'm a really good requester, and then you're a worker who's a scammer or just not very good yet. So in that case, what would happen in this system is that I'm a requester that's really good. My work gets released to the really awesome workers, and then to the mediocre workers, and then it eventually makes its way down to me, but only if no one else has taken it. And the moment that it does make it down to me, it's up at the top of my feed. That again also feels right to me. Sort of like I may not have early access because I'm not the best worker on the block, but as soon as it's there, the system lets me know, right? That seems honest. Like it seems like a contract that like I understand why it works that way, and it's comprehensible. And then you flip it and you say, let's say that now it's a really amazing worker and a really poor requester, someone like a penny hit requester, or someone who's just like, I don't know, drags people through the mud. So then what's going to happen is that I'm a requester, I release my tasks, they go first to the really great workers, but none of the great workers are going to take it because it's all down at the bottom of their feeds, right? And even if they go look down there, they're going to see it and realize that this requester has a terrible reputation and probably leave it. And eventually it's going to get released to more and more and more people until eventually someone who is willing to work with that requester, or maybe no one, takes the task. So again, all these things seem like sort of reasonable to me. But I would encourage you to sort of think through these very specific scenarios like that to make sure that we're not missing anything.
Yeah, sounds
and
good.
then,
Yeah, it
okay,
sounds good.
the other thing that came up is, and we talked about this a little bit, is this imbalance between, I guess free riders is really the wrong word. Lurkers maybe is a little bit more neutral. I guess the point is many people may not rate, especially in microtasks, and we need to make sure that our system still will have good signal. We'll still be able to take a new worker who's trying to make their way in the world and get them on their way, even if not everyone is rating them. So that's the other thing. That's like the other thing I wanted to make sure.
That's super important.
Yeah.
How do you reckon at this point that could be planned for?
Yeah, it's the kind of thing. That's the kind of thing that's really hard to do a user study on, because it's like if you bring someone into a lab and you're like, post a task, now rate the workers. Like they're going to sit there and rate all the workers, and it's much more when it's like, I really need this work done now, and my kids are crying, and I have 10 emails I haven't responded to. That's when someone's going to be tempted not to rate the worker, right? And it's really hard to put people into that scenario in a realistic way for a usability study. So we have to just make our best estimates for the moment. Yeah. So I guess I'm reading stuff off my board based on other comments that came up that either people in Slack told me, or that Adam, Neil, or Durham tossed my way when I was trying to get feedback, or when we were brainstorming, or they came up with the idea. One was, if we collapse to a 3-point system, or excuse me, if is there going to be a problem where people all collapse to that middle rating? If few people actually rate, or very few people give check pluses or check minuses, everyone's going to look identical. And is there a way to push away from that? And my hope is that by actually doing the check plus, check minus, it might be more likely that you wouldn't have that huge clustering. I'm still a little worried about it.
I don't know. My gut feeling is that you wouldn't have the clustering like it would be now. But I mean, that's something that we'll just have to try out ultimately.
Yeah, a little bit. That's true. I mean, again, keep in mind this, for example. Let's just take my back of the envelope calculation that like 1 in 20 workers or request, 1 in 20 workers on a microtask will get a rating. Now, it's obviously not strictly true. Like there will be going to be some requesters who rate everyone and others who don't rate anyone, and blah blah blah. But let's say the default is sort of check. Check means I accept this work, and and you're getting paid and all that kind of stuff. It means that 19 out of 20 times, basically you're getting a signal of 3 from me, or 0, or whatever neutral is. So it's going to be these rare events of check pluses and check minuses might have amplified importance. But I want to come back to something that you said earlier. Maybe this is a thing. So let's think through like what happens, right? So if let's say we release whether or not you rated me. So if I did a test for Angela and then she didn't rate me, it mentions that to me. Maybe that causes me to rate the requester lower, being like, this person doesn't give feedback. And that creates an incentive now for the requester to give more feedback. So that actually might be a good thing. That might work itself out. You see how that loop might lead to not collapsing to the middle rating? It might work. We'll have to see, though. Anyway, so that's a worry. Yeah, and then finally, down the road, I am interested in doing some amount of peer review. Like, I think, especially if we're creating different levels or something like this, I think it would be really cool to have eventually some, workers rating other workers.
I absolutely agree with that. Sorry, I'm just in the middle of sorting my kids out, but I just wanted to say yes, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, it's not what I would do immediately just because it feels like it would be hard to scale. But it's the kind of thing where, like, if you go up, quote, for a promotion, like you try to go from level time to have a jury of your peers, basically, who are in your same area of expertise, say, yeah, no, you are level 2, or no, actually not. You're performing still at the level of level 1. Will help get you connected to resources to get better, but right now you're in the right place. Anyway, so that's the end of my thoughts. I apologize for talking so much here. Jay Silver asks, for microtasks, would it be sensible to delegate the task to a smaller number of workers so there would be fewer workers to rate and therefore reputation coverage would be higher? Yeah, potentially. One thing that I really am hoping for with this platform is that, we talk about trust. If I can trust a worker to do the job right, then I can hire fewer workers to do it redundantly. And if I can hire fewer workers, then I can basically double or triple the payment I give each of them. And that just seems like a way better life for everyone. Like, I pay the same amount, I get a higher quality work product, and workers get paid more. So yeah, I think that would also help. You're right with the reputation thing. Not every task that can apply to. For example, anyone who's running a survey, like, you need 1,000 different people to do the survey. You can't group them. But I think there are many tasks for which this would apply. So yeah, great point, Jay. Darukshi, any other thoughts?
I think I really want to see how does it work with some data and some scenarios, like you said, every possible scenarios we can see. So once you put the wiki, and we'll gather some data, and also we'll try to put in an Excel sheet also, and try to work on a model.
Okay. So how are you feeling about things right now?
Not 100% all right, because it's so mechanical so far, because just 3 ratings and taking only the requesters point of view. But
what do you mean by taking only the requester's point of view?
Because requester is the one who's rating the workers only, so we haven't talked about how workers will rate the requesters. I mean, the task wouldn't, the search feed wouldn't take the workers' rate, right?
I'm sorry. Could you say that again? I'm not sure I understood yet.
When we search for a task, uh, the workers will get the requesters. No, I'm not quite get. Let me put that in the words and send you, because I can't.
Sure. I mean, if I'm understanding you correctly, I mean, basically each side is responsible for rating the other, which means that workers are helping workers and requesters are helping requesters. So if I'm a worker, then basically my ratings are used to help every worker sort through to identify which requesters are the good ones.
Okay.
So it's not one-sided. It's not that only the requester's point of view changes. And I mean, like, and much of what I was trying to do with this revision here was to give workers more power to sort of control their own feeds in addition. So like the workers are rating the requesters as a check minus, check, or check plus as well. I'm sorry if that wasn't clear.
Okay, I think I'm getting it. Just that we have to see with some scenarios how does the task
Yes.
fit,
Totally
how
agree.
does it appear as for same rating. For example, say I'm a worker with there are hundreds of workers with same rating. What would happen for the requester? Like who would be selecting based on the
Yeah,
same
so I guess in that case, so let's say it's a microtask for a minute. The system is trying to optimize for speed, so my sense is in that sense it would be first come, first serve. That is, so I am, I can't see any other fair way to do it. So let's say that the system releases the task to the workers, and the workers see it in their feeds, and those who have previously favorited that person or knew to search for it or happened upon it and said, yes, I will do this now. I will do it in and I have 3 hours to do it or whatever. They're the ones who get it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yes. Okay. So now, as a conclusion for this meeting, we'll see your wiki page, and based on that, we'll now when we say initial system based on these 3 ratings, now when are we going to think of the the next level of the model?
What do you mean by next model?
Like now we are initially focused on three ratings, right? The check minus and then only.
Yeah.
So if we are to think about other factors into this system, are we thinking later in the sense when?
Good question. So I mean, I would drive it as with most things on the system through user feedback. So if we are getting loud, for example, if we try this and our users are telling us that it's really, really poor, then we first of all, in that case, we should go back to the drawing board. But let's say that they like it, but they really feel like they need the ability to showcase previous work or whatever, these kinds of things. That's when we scramble a crowd team from our group based on people who are interested and have the requisite abilities, design and engineering and so on, to work on it. I would imagine that it's there will basically be a phase of our project that is focused on building the basic foundations. So that's the prototype task, the basic rating and reputation mechanisms and profile, and the ability to and the open governance structure. And that's really with research you have to focus on those elements that are most important, and to a certain extent to the exclusion of the others. And as soon as we get that basic platform up and running, basically for Kai, I would imagine, so in the next month or two, once that starts to stabilize, then we take a step back and we say, hey, what's the most pressing thing that we need to do next? Do we need to add some maturity to the reputation system in order to deal with this? Do we need to change the prototype task to do that? Do we need to restructure our open governance to do this? Do we need to do we want to try to open up to macro tasks? Is that the most important thing that we do next? We'd have to. I think what I would want to do, at least as a group, is put up on Meteor a bunch of ideas, and then we vote and we identify and we see what we're most excited about. I mean, I can't. That's just me off the top of my head.
Yeah, and also now when we want to empower the worker-requester relationship, what other factors that we can bring to the system? Ratings are the only thing, or else can we? What are the other things that we can bring to the platform to empower the?
Yeah, so if I were thinking about the kinds of things that have come up in everyone's submissions that I think are totally reasonable, one is I think we want to have the ability to have, as folks have mentioned, a sort of a good resume of like my work on the platform, especially as we push into macro tasks that will become more and more important. I would like to have open-ended textual feedback so that if a requester or a worker can leave feedback that adds more color, I would like people to be able to
having a portfolio, like sample work.
Yep, and as Britsi said, also endorsements and recommendations seem like a totally reasonable thing. All of these seem like sort of important second degree topics in that they will enhance any system that they're a part of. They're not themselves research, but they may be really important, as second steps. So all of those, I think, seem totally like a reasonable thing to do. The only reason that I've pushed back on them so far is that you can throw all of those things at a reputation system, but if the fundamentals are broken, then you're still going to have the same problems. Like they're much better as decorators of a good system than as as a complete reputation system of themselves.
Mm-hmm. And one other thing that I was thinking, like Google PageRank. Now, what if I have done a work for a best requester? Shouldn't that make me much more reputable than the others? Like.
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea. I really want to like it, and I have to think through it more because I can see ways that it can be gamed in really scary ways. Let me give this example. I mentioned briefly the penny hit requesters on Mechanical Turk. Do you know what those are? Feel free to say no. I'm happy to explain.
No, I don't know.
Okay, so penny hit requesters are requesters who put up work on Mechanical Turk for 1 cent. It's work that takes a long time. So people are making, maybe $1 an hour or something, really atrocious rates. Probably less than $1 an hour. Why do these people exist on Mechanical Turk? It's because they will always accept whatever you submit, basically. And so workers go to these people and do these atrocious hits because it's a way of improving their reputation. So they get more accepted hits, so then they can go do the other hits that require a higher acceptance rate. Okay, so here's what I worry about the PageRank thing, which is not to say that it's bad. It's just that I wish I could figure out how to make it work, and maybe you can help. Let's assume we're going to have people who want to be penny hit requesters on our system. It's just inevitable that someone's going to come who wants to basically pay workers as little as possible or not enough, and will promise to accept all work, basically, which means that they're going to give everyone a check plus, right? So they're going to try to inflate everyone's reputation. The workers are going to love them, right? So they're going to give this person check pluses too, right? Because they're like, oh man, this person always gives me a high rating, so I really want to see their work. It's like I'm really benefiting from this. So if we use a PageRank style system, what's going to happen is that these penny hit requesters might get an inflated PageRank score, right? Because so many people like them, and then their say is going to be really influential. So any worker who they've given a check plus to, which is all of potentially like the bad workers, are going to get really positive ranking. So this is a way to game the system in a way that really concerns me. Now, I also imagine they would get a bunch of negative ratings. Maybe it would balance out. Maybe I'm being too concerned. Anyway, so Dilrukshi, your idea at its core is what I'm really interested in, but I haven't been able to figure out how to make it work yet. So if you have ideas, let me know.
Yeah, sure. We'll give it a time and see. Okay, so
Cool.
we can
So
do the.
I'm gonna before I go to bed tonight, I'm gonna go try to write up a first draft of this wiki page. So I might want to sign off and so that I can spend some time working on that.
And if you can, please make some visuals because wikis. I know it's difficult in wiki, but visuals make it much more explainable.
Sure, I'll try.
Okay, then we can.
All right.
Sign.
Thanks
a
for
lot,
hosting, Dilrukshi, and thanks for your feedback and everyone's thoughts.
Thanks a lot.
Yes. Bye.
Okay. Good night. Good morning, wherever you are.
Okay.